Emma woke up to the soft sound of her alarm clock ringing on the small wooden table beside her bed. She rubbed her eyes and stretched, feeling the weight of another long day ahead. Life had never been easy for her, but she had learned to face each day with quiet strength. The little apartment she lived in was modest, with walls that carried the scent of freshly brewed tea and old books. She didn't own much, but she kept everything neat and warm, because it was the only space that truly belonged to her. Outside, the early sun spilled through the curtains, painting the room in a golden light. Emma got dressed quickly in her cafe uniform, a simple cream blouse and a black apron. She tied her hair back into a ponytail, glanced at the clock, and grabbed her worn-out bag. Her rent was due soon, and though she tried not to think about it too much, the thought kept following her like a shadow. But Emma had grown used to these worries. She had built her life around patience, hard work, and small hopes. The streets were just waking up as she walked to the cafe. The bakery on the corner filled the air with the smell of fresh bread, and the newspaper boys cycled past, shouting the headlines of the day. Emma greeted the old lady at the flower stall, who always smiled and handed her a small daisy for free. It was the kind of kindness Emma treasured, little gestures that reminded her the world still had good in it. She pinned the daisy to her apron and quickened her steps. When she arrived at the cafe, she pushed the glass door open and was greeted by the familiar sound of the bell above it. The aroma of roasted coffee beans filled the air, mixing with the sweetness of pastries that had just come out of the oven. The cafe wasn't fancy, but it had a charm of its own. Wooden tables polished to a soft shine, faded pictures of city life on the walls, and shelves lined with old books customers could borrow. It was a place where students came to study, office workers came for a quick break, and lonely souls came to find warmth in a cup of coffee. Emma tied her apron tighter and got to work. She wiped down tables, arranged cutlery, and carried trays back and forth with practiced ease. She greeted every customer with a smile, even when her feet ached from standing too long. Most people barely noticed her beyond the service she provided, but Emma never let that bother her. She believed in treating everyone with kindness, whether they noticed or not. That morning was like any other. A group of students crowded into the corner booth, laughing loudly as they compared notes for their exams. A businessman sat near the window, his eyes glued to his laptop screen while he sipped his black coffee. An elderly couple shared a slice of cake, whispering softly to each other as if the whole world belonged only to them. And Emma, weaving between them, was the quiet heartbeat of it all, making sure cups were full, plates were cleared, and everyone felt welcome. Sometimes, while pouring coffee or clearing dishes, Emma thought about her dreams. She had always wanted to study more, maybe even become a teacher one day. She loved books, loved the way stories could open up new worlds and teach lessons without saying them aloud. But dreams cost money, and money was something she had very little of. So, for now, she worked. And though it wasn't the life she imagined, she tried to find joy in the small things. The laughter of children who came in with their parents, the smell of freshly ground beans, and the smile of a satisfied customer. Her co-workers often teased her for being too soft-hearted. "You take things too seriously, Emma." One of them laughed as she carefully placed a napkin beside a customer's plate. But Emma just smiled. She knew not everyone understood her, but she didn't mind. She believed every small effort mattered, even if no one noticed. The morning stretched on, and the cafe grew busier. Emma moved faster now, balancing trays and dodging chairs. She could almost do it with her eyes closed. This rhythm of serving, smiling, cleaning, and repeating. It was ordinary, yes, but it was her ordinary. And for Emma, that was enough. Yet, even as she worked, she felt a strange sense that something unusual might happen that day. Maybe it was just her imagination, stirred by the restless energy of the city outside. Or maybe life was about to surprise her in ways she could never have guessed. As the clock ticked closer to noon, Emma paused for a moment to catch her breath. She leaned against the counter, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and looked around at the people filling the cafe. To anyone else, it was just a normal day. But for Emma, there was something quietly magical in these simple scenes. The cafe was alive, buzzing with stories she didn't know, secrets she couldn't hear, and dreams that belonged to strangers. She often wondered how many lives had crossed here without her knowing. How many people carried burdens like her, or joys they couldn't contain. She didn't know that soon, one of those strangers would leave behind more than a tip or a smile. One of them would leave behind something that could change the course of her life forever. For now, though, Emma carried on, wiping tables, refilling cups, and offering her small daisy-bright smile to anyone who looked her way. She didn't need anything extraordinary to be happy, but the extraordinary was already on its way to find her. The cafe door opened with a soft chime, the little bell above it ringing as always. Emma didn't look up at first. She was busy balancing a tray filled with steaming cups of coffee for the group of students in the corner. But when she returned to the counter, she noticed him. A man had walked in, and the air in the room seemed to shift. He wasn't loud or flashy, yet there was something about him that drew attention. He wore a dark suit, perfectly tailored, with a crisp white shirt beneath it. His shoes shone as if polished that very morning. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being noticed, though he gave no sign that he wanted to be. Emma watched as he scanned the cafe, his eyes sharp, as though he was searching for something, or perhaps deciding if this little place was worth his time. Finally, he walked toward an empty table near the window and sat down. He didn't pull out a phone or laptop like many of the other customers. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and stared outside, his face unreadable. Emma felt a flicker of curiosity. She had seen all kinds of people come and go, students, workers, families, but this man was different. He looked like he belonged to another world, one filled with glass towers and shining cars, not a cozy little cafe tucked away on a busy street. She picked up her notepad and walked over to his table. "Good morning," she said with her usual gentle smile. "What can I get for you today?" He turned his head toward her, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly. His features were sharp, almost too perfect, and his dark eyes carried a weight that made her feel as though he could see right through her. For a moment, she forgot her words. "Just a coffee," he said simply. His voice was low, steady, and left no room for further questions. Emma nodded quickly, wrote it down, and hurried back to the counter. Yet, even as she prepared the order, she couldn't shake the feeling of familiarity. Had she seen him before? On the television maybe? Or in a newspaper headline? His face stirred something in her memory, but she couldn't quite place it. When she returned with the cup of coffee, she set it gently in front of him. "Here you go," she said softly. He gave a small nod of thanks but didn't touch the cup right away. Instead, he wrapped his hands around it and stared at the steam rising in slow curls. He seemed lost in thought, as if the world outside the window and the cafe around him no longer existed. Emma lingered for just a second longer than usual, then reminded herself not to stare. She had other tables to serve, and it wasn't her place to wonder about strangers. But she couldn't ignore the quiet buzz his presence had created. A few of the students in the corner whispered among themselves, sneaking glances at him. The elderly couple paused their conversation to look his way. Even her coworker nudged her and whispered, "Who's that? He looks important." Emma shrugged, though inside she wondered the same. The man stayed quiet, sipping his coffee slowly. He didn't pull out a book, didn't check his watch, didn't seem in a hurry at all. He sat with the stillness of someone who was used to waiting. Emma noticed his hands, strong, elegant, with a gold watch glinting on his wrist. The watch alone looked like it cost more than she made in a year. As the minutes passed, Emma found herself stealing glances at him whenever she could. Something about him unsettled her, but not in a bad way. It was the kind of curiosity that made her want to know his story. Why was he here, in this quiet little cafe, when everything about him screamed wealth and power? At one point, their eyes met. It was only for a moment, but Emma felt her cheeks warm. She quickly looked away and busied herself with wiping the counter. She told herself not to read too much into it. He was just another customer. Yet, as she stacked plates and refilled cups, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that his arrival had disturbed the normal rhythm of her day. It was as though he carried an invisible storm inside him, and though he sat silently, the cafe itself seemed to sense it. After a while, he stood up abruptly. He placed a few bills on the table, far more than the price of a single coffee, and pushed the chair back. Without a word, he walked out of the cafe, his tall frame disappearing into the crowd outside. The bell above the door chimed again, and just like that, he was gone. Emma froze for a second, watching the door close behind him. Then she hurried over to clear the table. She picked up the cup, now half empty, and gathered the money. But as she bent down to pick up a napkin that had slipped to the floor, something caught her eye. There, glinting faintly in the sunlight that streamed through the window, was a small object lying just beneath the table. Emma leaned closer and gasped softly. It was a ring, a diamond ring so brilliant it seemed to hold its own light. She picked it up carefully, her heart racing. It was heavier than she expected, and the stone was unlike anything she had ever seen. The cut, the shine, the way it sparkled even in the dim cafe light, it was clearly worth a fortune. This was no ordinary ring. Emma straightened, the ring resting in her palm, and glanced toward the door as though the mysterious man might suddenly return. But he was long gone, swallowed by the busy street outside. She stood frozen, the sound of chatter and clinking cups fading around her, staring at the diamond that seemed so out of place in her hand. Her life had always been ordinary, filled with simple routines and quiet hopes. But in that single moment, as the weight of the ring pressed into her palm, Emma felt the first stirrings of something different, something that could change everything. Emma stood still for a long moment, the ring glimmering in her hand. Her heart beat faster than usual, and she felt almost dizzy staring at it. Never in her life had she held something so beautiful and valuable. The diamond was large, cut with perfect precision, and the band was smooth, shining like polished silver. Even someone who knew nothing about jewelry could tell this ring was worth a fortune. She turned it gently between her fingers, watching how the light caught the stone. It reflected tiny sparkles across the wooden table, like stars scattered in the cafe. Emma could hardly believe such a thing had been left behind so carelessly. Who left something like this under a cafe table? Then she remembered the man in the suit. The mysterious stranger who seemed so out of place in their little shop. It had to belong to him. Emma bit her lip. She thought of how calm and composed he looked, how his watch and clothes already showed his wealth. To him, perhaps, this ring was just another possession, something he could afford to lose and replace. But the way her fingers trembled while holding it told her it was something else entirely, at least to her. For Emma, it was not just a ring. It was a door to questions, temptations, and maybe even change. She slipped the ring into her apron pocket quickly, not wanting her co-workers or the customers to notice. But she wasn't fast enough. One of her co-workers, Jenny, saw the brief sparkle before it disappeared. "What's that?" Jenny whispered, leaning closer. Emma shook her head quickly. "Nothing," she said, trying to sound calm. Jenny narrowed her eyes. "That didn't look like nothing. Was that a diamond ring?" Emma pressed her hand against her pocket protectively. "I think it belongs to the man who was just here. He must have dropped it." Jenny raised her eyebrows. "Dropped it? Emma, do you know how much something like that is worth? You could sell it and never have to work another day here." Emma frowned. "That wouldn't be right. It's not mine." But Jenny's words had already planted a dangerous thought in her mind. What if she didn't return it? What if she kept it, sold it, and changed her life forever? Rent would never be a problem again. She could pay for school, maybe even travel. For the first time in years, she could live freely. The cafe noises faded in her mind as she imagined it. A different life, far away from endless shifts and aching feet. Just one choice, and everything could change. But then Emma looked around at the cafe, the familiar faces, the ordinary warmth of the place, and the little daisy pinned to her apron that reminded her of kindness. She knew deep down that if she gave in to the temptation, she would never forgive herself. She had been raised to believe honesty mattered more than money, more than comfort, even more than dreams. Still, she couldn't stop the war inside her. She thought about how easily the man had walked away, how casually he left behind something so precious. Did he even deserve to have it back? Her break came a little later, and Emma sat in the small staff room with the ring in her hand again. She studied it more closely this time. There was something unusual about it, not just the shine, but the way the band was engraved with delicate markings. She tilted it toward the light and noticed tiny letters etched inside. She couldn't read them fully at first, but it looked like words, initials perhaps, carved so faintly they were easy to miss. Her heart gave a small jump. This wasn't just jewelry. This ring held meaning, a personal story, maybe even a secret. Suddenly it felt heavier in her palm, not just because of its worth but because of the mystery it carried. Emma sighed and closed her fingers around it. She knew what she had to do. She would wait. If the man came back looking for it, she would return it. If he didn't, maybe she could find a way to track him down. Keeping it wasn't an option, not for her. But when she returned to the cafe floor, Jenny whispered again. Think about it, Emma. No one saw him drop it. He's gone. For all you know, he'll never come back. Why should you hand over something that could save you? Emma didn't answer. She just pressed her lips together and went back to work, though her mind kept spinning. Every time she touched her apron pocket, she felt the weight of her choice pressing against her. The rest of the day moved slowly. Customers came and went, conversations rose and fell, and the smell of coffee filled the air as always. Yet, for Emma, nothing felt ordinary anymore. She carried a secret with every step, a secret that sparkled every time she thought of it. Once, while clearing a table, she accidentally brushed against the ring through her apron, and she imagined the man's face if he realized it was gone. Would he be furious? Would he be broken? Would he even care? The thought sent a strange shiver through her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emma glanced at the door again and again, expecting him to return. But he didn't. Hours passed, and still no sign of the mysterious stranger. By the time her shift ended, Emma felt both relieved and anxious. She walked home slowly, the ring still tucked safely in her pocket. The streetlights flickered on, and the city seemed louder than usual, as though it was alive with her secret. She clutched her bag tighter, feeling as though everyone who passed her could somehow sense what she carried. In her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and pulled the ring out again. She placed it on the table, where it caught the weak light of the lamp and glowed like a hidden treasure. Emma stared at it for a long time, her thoughts tangled. It wasn't just an expensive ring. She could feel it now. It was something more, something important. And though she didn't yet know the story behind it, she felt certain of one thing. This small, shining circle had just changed the course of her life. Emma sat on the edge of her bed that night, staring at the diamond ring resting on the little wooden table in front of her. The light from the lamp made it sparkle, throwing tiny stars onto the walls of her small apartment. She could hardly believe that such a treasure was sitting there, inches away from her. Her heart beat faster as her mind filled with endless thoughts. She knew she had to make a choice, but the more she thought about it, the harder it became. On one side, she felt the strong pull of honesty. She had been raised to believe that keeping what wasn't yours was wrong. The ring didn't belong to her, no matter how much she needed money, no matter how tired she was of struggling. Somewhere out there, a man was probably searching for it desperately. If it really held personal meaning, if it was tied to memories or love, then keeping it would mean stealing not just a piece of jewelry, but someone's heart. But then came the other voice in her head. A softer, more dangerous voice. It whispered that this was her chance. For years, she had worked endless hours just to pay rent and bills. She had sacrificed her own dreams of studying and becoming a teacher. She had watched her friends move forward in life while she stood still, trapped by money problems. One ring could change all of that. With its worth, she could start over. She could pay for school, find a better place to live, and maybe even travel to the places she always read about in books. The choice sat heavy in her chest, and she felt torn between the two worlds. The next morning, Emma carried the ring in her apron pocket again as she walked to the cafe. The little daisy from the flower stall lady was pinned to her apron, but it didn't bring her the same joy as before. She felt restless, her thoughts consumed by the secret she carried. At work, Jenny noticed her distracted mood. "You're still thinking about that ring, aren't you?" she asked in a low voice while they stood behind the counter. Emma didn't answer right away. She glanced at the customers sipping their coffee, laughing, and living their ordinary lives. Then she looked back at Jenny. "Of course I'm thinking about it," Emma whispered. "How could I not? It's not something you forget." Jenny leaned closer. "Listen, Emma. That man's probably so rich he doesn't even care. He'll just buy another one. But you could use it. You could sell it, and it would change your whole life." Emma shook her head slowly. "It wouldn't feel right. I'd always know it wasn't mine. I'd feel guilty every single day." Jenny rolled her eyes. "You and your honesty. Sometimes you have to think about yourself for once." Emma wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Jenny's words echoed inside her because, deep down, Emma had thought the same. For once in her life, she wanted to put herself first. She wanted to stop struggling, stop worrying, stop dreaming of a better future and finally live it. But another part of her whispered that money earned through dishonesty would never bring her peace. She imagined looking at the ring years later, or holding the things it had bought, and feeling only shame instead of joy. That afternoon, a customer accidentally dropped a wallet while leaving. Emma noticed it on the floor and quickly ran after him. "Excuse me, sir, you dropped this," she said, handing it back with a smile. The man thanked her gratefully and left. Jenny, watching from behind, muttered, "See? That's you, always giving things back. But imagine if you hadn't. That wallet probably had $100 at least." Emma looked down at her hands and sighed. She couldn't change who she was. And maybe, just maybe, that was her strength. Still, when she returned home that night, the battle inside her heart grew stronger. She placed the ring back on the table and sat staring at it. The engraving inside the band caught her eye again. She leaned closer, her fingers tracing the tiny letters. It looked like a name, followed by a short phrase, though it was too delicate to read clearly under her lamp. It wasn't just decoration, it was personal. Her chest tightened. This wasn't simply a ring someone wore to show wealth. This belonged to someone's story, someone's past. Perhaps it was a wedding ring, a gift, or a memory of someone loved deeply. Suddenly, the idea of selling it felt unbearable. Emma closed her hand around the ring and whispered to herself, I can't keep this." She lay awake for hours that night, thinking about the man in the suit. His calm, almost sad expression replayed in her mind. She wondered what he would do when he realized it was gone. Would he come back? Would he be angry? Would he even remember the little waitress who served him coffee? Her thoughts kept circling the same truth. The right thing to do was to return it. But the temptation remained, pulling at her every time she thought about her dreams. It was the hardest moral choice she had ever faced, between her own happiness and the honesty that had always guided her life. By morning, she felt drained, but her decision was clearer. She couldn't betray her own heart. Even if no one else cared, even if no one else would ever know, she would know. And that mattered. She slipped the ring into a small pouch and tied it carefully. As she walked to work that day, her steps felt lighter. She didn't know what would happen, whether the man would return or not, but she knew what she had to do. She would wait. If he came back, she would return it, no questions asked. If not, she would find another way to reach him. For the first time since she found the ring, Emma felt a sense of peace. The choice wasn't easy, but it was hers. And in her heart, she believed it was the right one. The cafe was busy that afternoon. The sound of clinking cups and quiet chatter filled the air, mixing with the smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries. Emma moved from table to table, her hands steady, but inside her heart was restless. Every time the bell above the door rang, her eyes shot toward it, searching for the man in the dark suit. She didn't know if he would ever return, but she hoped he would. Hours passed. She served regular customers, smiled politely, and even laughed softly at small jokes. But her mind wasn't in the cafe. It was on the small pouch hidden in her apron pocket. Inside it rested the diamond ring, safe and untouched, waiting for its owner. The afternoon sun poured through the wide windows, painting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Emma wiped a table near the corner when suddenly the bell chimed again. She turned automatically, and her breath caught. There he was. The man in the dark suit had returned. This time, he wasn't calm. His sharp eyes scanned the cafe quickly, his steps fast and uneven as he walked in. His face carried something Emma hadn't seen before. Worry. Real worry. His usually composed expression looked heavy, almost desperate. He went straight to the counter, his voice firm but low. "Excuse me. Did anyone happen to find a ring? I think I left something behind here yesterday." Emma froze. For a moment, she couldn't move. She had been waiting for this moment, imagining how it might go. But now that it was here, her hands trembled. The cafe around her faded into silence in her mind, though the noise still carried on. All she could see was the man's anxious face, his strong jaw tight with tension. Her coworker shook her head. "No, nothing was turned in," she said quickly, before Emma could open her mouth. Jenny gave Emma a sharp glance, as if silently warning her not to say anything. Emma ignored the look. She stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "Wait. I think I know what you're looking for." The man turned to her instantly. His dark eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Emma felt the weight of his gaze fully. There was no calmness in them now, only hope and fear tangled together. Emma reached into her apron pocket slowly and pulled out the pouch. Her fingers felt heavy as she untied it, and the cafe light caught the diamond the moment she revealed it. Gasps rose from a few nearby customers who had noticed. The man's eyes widened. Relief washed over his face like a wave crashing down. He stepped closer, almost unable to believe it. You found it," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. Emma nodded, her hand still stretched out with the ring resting in her palm. "It was under your table. I thought you might come back for it." For a moment, he didn't take it. He just stared at it, as though seeing something far more precious than gold or diamonds. Then, with a trembling hand, he picked it up carefully, holding it like it was the most fragile thing in the world. His eyes closed briefly, and Emma thought she saw the glimmer of something rare, tears. He opened them again and looked at her. "Do you know what this means to me?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Emma shook her head softly. "I only knew it wasn't mine to keep." For a long second, the man said nothing. He studied her face as though searching for something. Then he nodded, almost to himself. "Most people wouldn't have given it back," he said finally. His words weren't accusing, just honest. Jenny, standing behind the counter, muttered under her breath, "That's what I said," but Emma didn't react. She kept her eyes on the man, feeling a strange connection in that moment. The man slipped the ring into his pocket, but carefully, almost protectively. He straightened his posture, his expression slowly regaining its usual calm, though now his eyes carried warmth instead of cold distance. "I owe you," he said firmly. "Not just for finding it, but for your honesty. You could have walked away with it. You didn't." Emma shrugged slightly, her cheeks warming. It wouldn't have been right. The man gave a small smile, the first she had seen on his face. It softened his sharp features, making him look less like an untouchable figure and more like a real person. "Still," he said, "it means more than you can imagine." The cafe seemed quieter as the moment passed between them. Customers returned to their conversations, the noise rising again, but Emma still felt the weight of the exchange. The man placed a few bills on the counter again, far more than the cost of coffee. Then, after a brief pause, he looked back at her once more. "What's your name?" "Emma," she replied softly. He nodded, as though memorizing it. "Thank you, Emma." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed as he stepped outside, disappearing once more into the busy street. Emma stood frozen, her hands slightly shaking, her mind racing. The relief on his face, the way he had held the ring like it carried his whole world. She couldn't stop replaying it in her mind. Jenny leaned closer, whispering, "You're crazy, you know that? Do you realize what you just gave up?" Emma didn't answer. She was still staring at the door, her heart full of something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't regret. No, it was something else, something lighter. She had done the right thing, and for the first time in days, she felt completely certain about it. As she picked up the bills he had left behind, her eyes widened. It was far more than she had ever been tipped before. Enough to cover her rent for a month. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the look in his eyes, the gratitude that seemed deeper than words. Emma went back to her work, her daisy pinned to her apron, her step steady. The ordinary cafe day had once again become extraordinary. Something had shifted, and she sensed that this was only the beginning. That evening, the cafe was quieter. The crowd had thinned, and only a few customers lingered with their cups, lost in their own conversations. Emma wiped down the table slowly, her mind still replaying the afternoon. She could not forget the way the man's face had softened when she returned the ring. The relief, the gratitude, and the strange heaviness in his eyes. It was all carved into her memory. As she placed the last cup back behind the counter, the bell above the door chimed again. Emma turned, and her heart skipped. It was him. The man in the dark suit had come back. This time, his steps were slower, more deliberate. He didn't rush to the counter like before. Instead, he walked directly toward her, his gaze fixed on her face. Emma felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure what to expect. "Emma," he said quietly, his deep voice carrying her name as though it were familiar now. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron nervously. "You came back." He gave a faint smile. "I had to. I didn't thank you properly earlier. What you did, it wasn't just kind. It meant more than you know." Emma shook her head gently. "I only gave back what wasn't mine." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the ring. He placed it carefully on the table between them, the diamond catching the dim cafe light. For a moment, both of them just looked at it. "This ring," he said slowly, "isn't just expensive. It isn't about money at all. It's the last gift my wife gave me before she passed away." Emma's breath caught. Suddenly, the sadness she had seen in his eyes made sense. The ring wasn't just an accessory. It was a memory, a piece of his heart. She had it engraved on the inside, he continued, his voice softer now. Her initials, and a message. It was her way of reminding me that love doesn't end, even when life does. He lifted the ring gently, turning it so Emma could see the tiny letters carved within. Emma leaned closer, her eyes widening as she read the faint engraving. It was small, but clear enough now, "Forever with you." Her chest tightened. She felt a lump in her throat, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. The man's calm composure had cracked, and she could see the pain beneath it. "When I realized I had lost it," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I felt like I had lost her all over again. That's why I came back in such a hurry. To most people, it's just a diamond. But to me, it's her." Emma swallowed hard. She couldn't imagine the depth of that pain, of losing someone you loved and then almost losing the last reminder of them. She understood now why he had held the ring so tightly, why his eyes had looked so full of relief when she returned it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why. Maybe because she wished she could take away his pain. The man shook his head. "Don't be sorry. Be proud. You saved me from losing the only thing that still connects me to her. You may not realize it, Emma, but what you did changed everything." His words made her chest ache with both sadness and something else, something warm. She had thought she was only doing the right thing, a simple act of honesty. But now she saw how much it mattered. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The cafe seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them at that table, the ring glinting softly between their hands. Emma finally spoke. "I didn't know. I only thought it must mean something important. That's why I couldn't keep it." The man studied her, his dark eyes softer now. "And that's why you're different. Most people would see only its value. You saw more." Emma felt her cheeks grow warm. She wasn't used to such words, to being seen in that way. She looked down, fidgeting with her apron string. The man leaned back slightly, taking the ring again and slipping it back into his pocket. "I never told you my name," he said, almost as if realizing it himself. "I'm Alexander. Alexander Pierce." The name clicked in Emma's mind. She had heard it before, on the news, in magazines. A billionaire businessman, known for his wealth and power, but also for his private, almost mysterious life. That explained the air about him, the way he seemed so different from everyone else. She blinked in surprise but quickly caught herself. To her, in that moment, he wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man holding on to the memory of his lost wife. Alexander gave a small, almost sad smile. "You've given me back more than a ring, Emma. You've given me back a piece of her." Emma didn't know how to respond. All she could do was nod, her heart heavy with the weight of his story. She felt grateful she had made the right choice, but she also felt humbled by the trust he had shown her. For the rest of the evening, Alexander stayed at the cafe. He ordered another coffee, but this time he didn't sit alone in silence. He spoke with Emma whenever she passed by, asking her about her life, her work, her dreams. She told him little pieces, shyly, about wanting to study, about her love for books, about how hard things had been. And for the first time, she saw something change in his eyes. Not just gratitude, but interest. As if he was beginning to see her, not just as a waitress, but as someone worth knowing. When he finally left, the bell chiming softly behind him, Emma stood still for a long while. She touched her apron, where the ring had once rested in secret, and thought about the story he had shared. She knew then that her life had just crossed paths with his for a reason. She didn't yet know what that reason was, but she felt certain of one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days after Alexander told Emma the truth about the ring felt different. The cafe still buzzed with its usual rhythm, cups clinking, voices murmuring, the smell of roasted coffee filling the air. But for Emma, everything seemed changed. She kept replaying his words in her mind, especially the way his voice had softened when he spoke about his late wife. She had seen a side of him that few probably ever did, a side that carried both pain and tenderness. One late afternoon, when the cafe was quieter and most of the tables were empty, the bell above the door chimed again. Emma looked up, and her heart skipped the way it always did now. Alexander Pierce walked in. He wasn't in a hurry this time. His steps were steady, his face calm, but his eyes held a look of purpose. He approached the counter, and Emma quickly put aside the tray she was holding. "Good evening," she greeted, her voice soft. "Good evening, Emma," he replied, his tone warm, as if they had known each other longer than a few days. He ordered coffee again, though she guessed he wasn't there for the drink. When she brought the cup to his table, he gestured for her to sit. At first, she hesitated. Waitresses didn't sit with customers, especially not ones like him. But something in his expression made her feel it was all right. She untied her apron, wiped her hands nervously, and sat across from him. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, his fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. Then he spoke. "Emma, I've been thinking about you." Her eyes widened slightly. She didn't know what to say, so she stayed silent, waiting. "You had something in your hands," he continued slowly, "something worth more than most people could imagine. And yet, you gave it back without hesitation. That kind of honesty is rare. It's something money can't buy." Emma lowered her eyes. "It wasn't mine to keep," she said softly. Alexander leaned forward. "Maybe not. But in giving it back, you've shown me something I thought I'd lost. The belief that there are still people in this world who choose what's right, even when no one is watching." Emma's cheeks grew warm, and she fiddled with her apron string. She wasn't used to such words. She had lived her life quietly, without much recognition. To her, doing the right thing was natural, not something to be praised. Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. Emma blinked, looking at it with confusion. "What's this?" "A gift," he said simply. "Not because you asked for anything, but because you didn't." She slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a check. Her breath caught when she saw the amount written there. It was more money than she had ever held in her hands before. Enough to cover her rent for months, enough to pay her bills, enough to change her life. I can't take this, she stammered, pushing it back toward him. But Alexander shook his head. Emma, listen to me. This isn't charity. It's gratitude. That ring, his voice faltered slightly. It means more than my entire fortune. And you gave it back without a second thought. If it had been lost forever, no amount of money could have replaced it. What I'm offering you is small compared to what you gave me. Emma stared at the check, her hands trembling. Tears pricked her eyes, not because of the money, but because of the weight of his words. She had never thought of herself as someone special, yet here was a man the world admired for his wealth, telling her she had given him something priceless. She shook her head slowly. I don't need your money, Alexander. I only wanted to do the right thing. Alexander smiled faintly. And that's exactly why I want to help you. Tell me, Emma, what is it you dream of? What is it you want, truly? Her breath caught. She had never said it aloud to anyone. Not really. But the way he asked, the sincerity in his eyes, made her feel safe to answer. I've always wanted to study, she admitted softly. To become a teacher. I love books, I love learning, and I want to share that with others. But, she trailed off, glancing down. It's expensive. I could never afford it. Alexander leaned back, his eyes narrowing slightly as though he was already planning something. Then let me help you. Not with just money in an envelope, but with a future. I can cover your education. Every expense. You'll never have to worry about whether you can afford your dream. Emma's heart raced. She stared at him in disbelief. You can't be serious, she whispered. I've never been more serious, he replied. You've proven you're someone who values honesty above wealth. That's rare. That's the kind of person who deserves a chance to build the life they dream of. Let me give you that chance. Emma's eyes blurred with tears. She tried to speak, but no words came. She thought of the nights she had stayed awake worrying about money, the mornings she dragged herself out of bed for long shifts, the dreams she kept locked away because they felt impossible. And now, here was this man, offering her the key to unlock them. Finally, she whispered, Why me? Alexander smiled softly. Because sometimes life gives us people at the exact moment we need them. You gave me back more than a ring. You gave me hope. Now it's my turn to give you something back. Emma covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. She had never believed in miracles, but this felt close to one. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. Alexander reached across the table and placed his hand gently over hers. No, Emma. Thank you. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Emma was afraid she might wake up from. Life, which had once been a circle of endless shifts, late nights worrying about rent, and quiet dreams locked away in her heart, had begun to change in ways she never imagined. True to his word, Alexander kept in touch with her. At first, Emma found it hard to believe that someone like him, a billionaire who probably had the whole world at his feet, would care about a waitress from a small cafe. But he did. He arranged meetings, introduced her to people who could guide her, and most importantly, he set up the scholarship in her name. Suddenly, the dream of becoming a teacher, which had once felt impossible, was right in front of her. Emma still worked at the cafe for a while, though her heart was lighter now. The weight of hopelessness no longer pressed down on her. Each day, as she served customers, she carried with her a secret joy, the knowledge that her future was finally opening up. Her co-workers noticed the change too. Even Jenny, who had once teased her about returning the ring, admitted quietly one evening, You did the right thing, Emma. I see it now. Emma only smiled. She didn't need to say anything more. One sunny morning, as she walked to the cafe, the familiar streets felt different. The flower stall lady handed her a daisy as always, but this time Emma tucked it carefully into her bag instead of her apron. She knew her days as a waitress were coming to an end. It was bittersweet, because the cafe had been her safe place for so long, but she was ready for something more. That afternoon, Alexander visited again. He sat at his usual table by the window, sipping coffee while waiting for her break. Emma approached with a shy smile. "You look different today," he said, studying her face. "Do I?" she asked with a small laugh. "Yes," he nodded. "Like someone who finally sees the road ahead." Emma sat across from him, her hands folded nervously on the table. "I've been accepted into the program," she said quietly. "I start classes next month." Alexander's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful, Emma. I knew you could do it." She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I never thought I'd get here. I used to think dreams were only for other people. Not for someone like me. But you changed that." Alexander shook his head gently. "No, Emma. You changed it yourself. I may have opened a door, but you were the one brave enough to step through." Her eyes stung with tears, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from joy, from relief, from the feeling of finally being seen for who she truly was. The last day she worked at the cafe was filled with mixed emotions. The staff surprised her with a small farewell, and even some of the regular customers wished her luck when they heard she was leaving. Emma looked around the little cafe one last time, her heart full of gratitude. This place had been where everything began, the ordinary day that turned extraordinary. As she walked out of the cafe for the final time, the bell above the door chimed as if marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Her days quickly filled with books, classes, and learning. She spent hours in libraries, her mind alive with knowledge she had once only dreamed of exploring. Each page she read felt like a step closer to her dream. And every time she doubted herself, she remembered the words Alexander had said, that honesty and courage had brought her here, and those same qualities would carry her forward. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would think back to the moment she found the ring under the cafe table. What if she had made a different choice? What if she had listened to Jenny and sold it? Her life would have been entirely different. She might have had quick money, but she would have lost the peace of knowing she had done the right thing. And she would never have met Alexander in the way she did. One evening, as she sat at her desk surrounded by books, Emma pulled out the daisy she had pressed between the pages of her notebook. It reminded her of the flower stall lady, of the cafe, and of the girl she used to be. She smiled softly. She hadn't forgotten her old life. She carried it with her as a reminder of how far she had come. Alexander visited her occasionally, checking on her progress. Their conversations had grown warmer, filled with laughter and shared stories. He never treated her like someone he had rescued. Instead, he treated her like an equal, someone with her own strength and worth. Slowly, Emma realized that the bond between them had deepened into something neither of them had expected. Years later, when Emma finally stood in front of a classroom filled with eager children, chalk in hand and sunlight streaming through the windows, she felt a swell of pride. She had made it. The dream she once thought impossible was now her reality. And it all began with a single choice: returning a ring that didn't belong to her. She often thought of Alexander's wife, the one whose memory was engraved inside the ring. "Forever with you." Those words stayed with Emma, too, as a reminder that love, kindness, and honesty leave marks that last forever. Emma's life was transformed, not by riches alone, but by the strength of her character and the unexpected friendship of a man whose life had also been touched by loss. Together, they had healed something in each other. He, by giving her a future, and she, by reminding him of the goodness that still existed in the world. And so, the waitress who once dreamed quietly in a small cafe became a woman who lived her dream boldly, carrying with her the story of a lost ring, a billionaire's gratitude, and the simple truth that doing the right thing can change everything.